Investment solutions with confidence.
One of the reasons I chose Barcelona to highlight the plight of Spain is because it, to me, epitomises everything that's great about a European city. It's got great history, amazing art, the food is fantastic, the people are vibrant and optimistic despite everything, because Barcelona, like many places in Europe, is a bit beleaguered at the moment, but it has the potential to have an enormously successful and influential economy within Spain and within the Eurozone. There are a few issues, of course. There is a sizable group of Catalans that want Catalonia to break away from Spain and be an independent state, but stay in the Euro, mind you. Just like there are a few Italians and Greeks that don't want to be in the Eurozone, and also just like a few Germans. I mean, it was only in mid-March that the Alternative for Deutschland party was formed by the Christian Democrats, or some breakaway Christian Democrats, and also some senior academics. And AfD, as it's called, is staunchly anti-Europe. And that's enough of the negativity. Let's have a look at something that Barcelona is known for around the world, a thing of great beauty. It's quite extraordinary. Come with me. Behind me is the Sagrada Familia, which is the magnum opus of one of Barcelona's favourite sons, Antoni Gaudi. The whole thing was started in 1882, but Gaudi became involved in 1883. And in 1915, he threw everything out and gave this carte blanche. In other words, he focused solely on this particular project, which is extraordinary, I think you'll agree. In 1926, when he died, only about 20% of the Sagrada Familia was finished. Eventually, and they reckon that will be 2027, 2028 when it's finished. How similar is this to the Eurozone itself? A brilliant idea conceived by men of ideals and then taken on by a man of passion. And just like the Eurozone, it has its critics. And just like the Eurozone, it's a work in progress. Klaus Schwab writes in his book, The Reemergence of Europe, with the crisis now engulfing the entire European Union, particularly the Eurozone, all understand that the Maastricht Treaty was imperfect in its design. It established a monetary union without the political union that constitutes a prerequisite for a common currency to function properly. The history of Europe tells of numerous factions and also many wars over the centuries. Against that backdrop, were the designers of the European Union and the Eurozone over-optimistic when they put this plan together? Culturally, politically, economically, and in many other ways, these countries are all completely different, with different skills and aspirations.
Europe is still, and hopefully it will stay, a very diverse region. But I think that's also our strength. And our challenge is now to further develop our economic links, to further develop our political links, but at the same time to maintain the richness and the diversity of our cultures. But there is no doubt that there is a huge economic challenge there, because as you say, the underlying economies, the real economies in the different European countries are different, are very different, and that will of course also in the future lead to lasting differences in income.
You know, the one thing that you can't get away from is you can't really cheat economics. At the end of the day, one can talk about all these cultural differences and how the French are perhaps have a more socialist bend to the way that they run policy. The Germans have very much an Austrian economic-minded approach to their economics. But the reality is, those countries that have had the sustainable economic policies and implemented them successfully are the ones that are currently driving the direction of general policy right now.
With me now is Albert Carrera, who is the Secretary General at the Ministry of Economy and Information at the Government of Catalonia here in Barcelona. Secretary General, thanks very much for joining me. How much has the Eurozone crisis affected your ability to function?
Well, it's affecting in many different ways. But mostly it's affecting in our finances, in our ability to get money, to get funds. The euro crisis means uncertainty, so the risk premium is very high, so we have to pay a lot in order to get money in order to finance our deficits and our debt. The first thing that we would need is simply to get the financial system working again. So having a smoothly working banking and credit system. This would be the crucial issue. And this is not simply an issue, or not mostly an issue of growth, but it's an issue of having the whole of the system working again as it used to work.
This is the problem not in Spain. I think this is the problem in Europe now, because all the European countries want to control the deficit and to reduce the public expenditure, and at the same time want to reduce the problems of the companies closing every day. The solution is clear. It's necessary to control the public deficit. The private sector has done the homework, but it's necessary to have the same success in the government area in terms of to do the very hard homework also to reduce the imbalance of the public sector.
The public finances had around 10% extra revenues that were coming from the taxes that came from real estate transactions. These extra revenues are gone, and they are gone forever. So right now we are in the situation that in order to restore sound finances, sound public finances, you should be lowering government expenditure by a factor of 10%, because this is a permanent shock. I mean, those revenues are not going to go back in a few years. So the level of adjustment that you have to do in the public sector is huge.
The crisis came after many booming years, and the boom was made out mostly of residential building, and public works. So these were the two sectors that were hit immediately. New licenses to start a new building in Catalonia have been reduced 20 times.
If we had to blame somebody, we should blame, I guess, Spanish politicians. Without the help of especially the local governments, the extent of the real estate bubble would have been much less than it actually was. It was a complete orgy of new developments every week and everywhere in crazy places. All of a sudden you saw a new construction project that didn't make sense there. However, local politicians were benefiting a lot from that. So it was a symbiosis between the financial sector and the politicians that certainly contributed a lot to the situation.
When the world stock markets crashed in 2008, so did the Spanish IBEX 35. While other markets recovered over the next few years, the Spanish stock market lagged.
The Spanish, in comparison with other countries, our prices are very low. There are big opportunities, no? But the Spanish government and all the country is necessary to continue doing a lot of homework. We need to think that every cent of euro is a lot of money, and we need to spend this money carefully.
I love the attitude of the general manager of the Barcelona Stock Exchange. He was so positive. He said we've just got to stop blaming other people and essentially get on with it ourselves. At the same time, I was disgusted by the attitude of the Spanish bankers. The reason? Because 5 banks that we approached, all 5 said no. Maybe that tells you about who's really responsible for what's happening in Europe at the moment.
I think, like every property crisis, it is some people try just to blame the banks. At the end of the day, it's greed from everyone. It's greed from the property owners, it's greed from the banks as well. They do everything to get as many mortgages, to sell as many mortgages as possible.
So lending was reckless in the sense that households didn't really know how to deal with a situation in which they could suddenly borrow at 3%, 4%, 5%, where a decade earlier, the average interest rate had been 18%, 19%, 20%. They looked at their household income, they said, this is the amount of interest I can pay, and that suddenly translated into a very large-looking number of debt that they could carry, and the banks mindlessly extended this credit, not thinking about the fact that, of course, in the old days, much of the value of this debt was being eroded by inflation. And the reason why interest rates in the Euro era are low is that inflation is low. So these households are still struggling to repay these debts that they took out a decade ago, which are still very much high in real terms, but most of the assets that they bought with them, like cars, have no value at all anymore.
Everybody had too high expectations on the future of growth. I'm convinced that perhaps better regulation on banks would have been very useful.
Chairman of the Federal Reserve, by the name of Martin in the 1960s, said the job of the Fed is to take away the punch bowl before the party gets really going. Leaning against the wind, that sort of thing. And because interest rates were so low for so long, and the Bank of Spain did almost nothing to reduce lending volumes, it didn't lean on the banks to actually require higher down payments, for example, and so forth, what they really did was the equivalent of adding gin and vodka and other spirits to the punch bowl.
And when investments dry up and debts increase across the board, unemployment figures grow in matching proportion. In Spain, there's 55% youth unemployment. It's unacceptable. It's a social disaster, actually. But the young people of Barcelona are absolutely fantastic. They're so optimistic about the future, despite the fact that most of them admitted that they didn't have much hope about getting a job. Perhaps those people that are pro-austerity in Brussels, before they go into one of their expensive conferences and pass some new austerity measure, perhaps they should speak to the youth of Europe first.
From my point of view, our opportunities are not in Spain, are outside Spain, because I think that it's rather difficult to get a well-paying job in Spain.
I was lucky enough, so I just got placed at a very decent job, but it's in Canada, so it's not here. There were no jobs, and if there were some, they were just really bad. If you compare them to any other job that any other European institution or any other institution from around the world can offer you. It's pretty bad, the situation.
The last estimate is that around 2.5 million jobs were lost directly in the construction sector. And that's directly. Imagine the indirect effect. So it's even more than 2.5 million jobs that were lost in the last 4 years.
The situation looks pretty grim, especially in the southern European region. In the first weeks of April, the Portuguese Constitutional Court informed the Portuguese government that cutting pay and benefits from the public sector was unfair and unacceptable. Questions hang over the stability of Italy, and Cyprus is still shell-shocked from its banking crisis. What does the future hold for the Eurozone?